The year 1985 saw major changes in the Kremlin. Konstantin Chernenko died and was replaced by the youthful Mikhail Gorbachev. Soccer fans went on the rampage during a European Cup match in Belgium's Heysel Stadium, causing the deaths of 41 Juventus supporters. In Auckland Harbour, French saboteurs sank the Greenpeace protest ship Rainbow Warrior, killing one of her crew. While on a more optimistic note in London, Bob Geldof brought together many of rock's superstars in the Live Aid concert to raise money for Africa's famine-stricken poor. In the early evening of the 29th of December 1985, a train pulled out of Hackney Wick Station in East London. A girl headed out of the station and into the winter night. She was a 19-year-old secretary, Alison Day, and she was going to meet her boyfriend at a nearby printing works. Alison never got there, and her disappearance led to a nationwide search. But it was not until 2 weeks later that her body was found in the nearby River Lee. Police frogmen brought it ashore and continued to search up and down the river. The murder inquiry team was headed by Detective Superintendent Charlie Farquhar. He reckoned that Alison had been abducted as she crossed the station's lonely footbridge, and then...
She had been tied up, strangled, brutally raped, and her body disposed of by being thrown into the River Lee. She was found after 14 days. And of course, by that time, there was virtually no forensic evidence whatsoever. We did, however, find one important clue in the river.
A few yards away, the frogmen had brought up Alison's sheepskin coat. The coat's pockets had been weighted with stones to keep the body underwater. Its discovery was important, since the body itself had been in the water for so long that most forensic clues such as semen or hairs had been washed away. But a full forensic examination of the coat did find a number of foreign fibers sticking to it. Matching ones were found on Alison's jeans and shirt. Once anything that could have come from the river had been eliminated, it seemed almost certain that what remained was from Alison's killer's clothes. The police now had the means to link someone directly to the murder, but only if they could isolate a suspect. And that seemed a long way off.
We had no witnesses who saw Alison on the train or at Hackney Wick Station. All the immediate suspects were very quickly eliminated. Nothing else at all. But we did get one interesting fact from the pathologist who carried out the post-mortem examination.
Alison's hands had been tied behind her back with a strip of cloth torn from her shirt. The killer had used another strip to make a tourniquet, which was tightened with a piece of wood. Another angle which Farquhar's team followed up was to liaise with the officers conducting Operation Heart, one of Britain's largest ever rape enquiries. This had been set up in July 1985, after 3 women had been attacked in one night in the Warren Street and Kentish Town areas of London. Similarities with some 19 other rapes during the previous 3 years made the police realize that a serial rapist was on the loose. A team which came to be headed by Detective Superintendent Ken Worker had been set up at West Hendon Police Station to coordinate the hunt. The rapes had begun in June 1982, when two men attacked a 23-year-old woman at West Hampstead Tube Station. 3 similar cases had occurred in northwest London during the autumn and winter of 1982, and then the attacks had stopped. They resumed, but with only a single attacker, on the 20th of January 1984, close to Barnes Common Station in southwest London. 20 more attacks had taken place over the next 18 months, 4 of them since Operation Heart had been set up. Superintendent Worker's team had been able to build up considerable information.
Well, we knew that one was a tall man and one was a short man. We didn't know a great deal about the tall man, but the shorter one was an A-secretor blood group, and from witnesses we were told he had fair hair. We also knew that this man often worked alone, and he had a very distinctive methods in the way that he operated. He would always carry a knife, he would engage the girls in conversation before he attacked them, and he would steal property from them on occasions, and he would often attack girls near deserted railway stations.
Operation Heart detectives set up an index of all known sex offenders with an A-secretor blood group. They were confident that their quarry would be among these Z-men, as they were codenamed. For the rapist's methods showed that he probably had previous experience of police procedure. He would wipe away his semen with a paper tissue and comb through the victim's pubic hair. Detectives issued this reconstruction, knowing they were dealing with a vicious and cunning individual who knew how to get rid of forensic evidence. Comparing notes, the detectives on the 2 inquiries found that there was little directly to connect them. But 3 months later, on the 18th of April, 1986, near the station of Horsley in Surrey, to the south of London, a link was made brutally clear. A 15-year-old schoolgirl, Marty Tamboza, daughter of a Dutch businessman, left her home to cycle to the village of East Horsley. To avoid the traffic on the busy A246, she took a lonely footpath running through a spinney alongside the main London railway line. When Marty did not return home, a search was organised. Her body was found early the next morning in the spinney by the footpath. Detective Chief Superintendent John Hurst of Surrey CID was put in charge of the case.
It was probably the worst killing I'd ever seen in my career. She had been savagely raped, subjected to brutal head injuries and strangled.
Detective Chief Superintendent Hurst immediately noted one significant fact.
During the course of the examination at the scene, it became clear to me that we were searching for somebody who had deliberately endeavoured to destroy evidence. Here, there was a clear attempt to actually destroy the body and also destroy various parts of the body with a view to preventing any police officers or scientists obtaining forensic evidence.
Despite this, the police investigation did find important clues. Marty's bicycle was propped against a tree nearby. Close to it was a length of nylon cord which had been tied across the lonely path to force the girl to dismount. There was an unusually small footprint near the body. Tissues and matchsticks were found, and there were enough semen traces left for the laboratories to work on. Police questioning in the Horsley area produced several witnesses on the 6:07 p.m. train to London who remembered a smallish man with what were described as staring eyes rushing onto the platform just as it was about to leave. As a result,
we actually tried to trace every single person on that train. That included searching through 2 million railway tickets.
But there were no useful fingerprints or other leads. More encouraging was the string used to stop and bind Marty. This was a distinctive type called somyarn. The manager of the factory which made it was able to identify it as belonging to a batch produced in 1982, most of which had been sold to British Rail. The semen traces provided a vital link, for they were enough to enable the police forensic laboratories to establish that the killer was a type A secretor. A new test measuring the blood enzyme PGM was also used. This breaks people down into 10 distinct groups and can narrow the field to an average of 1 suspect in 5. It took only a few hours for the Tamboza murder inquiry team to start to make some chilling connections.
The links between these two offences were that the hands had been tied, clothing had been cut, and the blood group of the rapist was exactly the same as the murderer. And of course it was part of the Operation Heart series. And we then knew that we were looking for a multiple rapist and murderer.
Hearst also contacted Detective Superintendent Farquhar and soon realised that Marty Tamboza had not just been strangled, but had also been killed with a tourniquet, like Alison Day. The links were so compelling that all 3 inquiries were now brought together under the head of Surrey CID, Detective Chief Superintendent Vincent McFadden. During the 9 months that their inquiry had been running, the Operation Heart team had begun to move certain individuals onto a list of prime suspects. One of these was a small, slightly built man with staring eyes who had gone on police lists in August 1985, when his estranged wife charged him with rape and assault. His name was John Francis Duffy. Despite police objections, Duffy had been released on bail. While he was out, another rape had occurred, which greatly interested the combined inquiry team.
This particular crime, which was a rape at the Copt Hall in North London in 1985, was in so many cases similar to the evidence that was before me in relation to Tamboza, that I really felt that if we could find the person who committed that particular rape, we would seriously want to talk to him about the murder of Marty Tamboza.
On Saturday, the 17th of May, 1986, 1 month after the killing of Marty Tamboza, the inquiry team again ran into John Francis Duffy. Officers had brought in a slightly built man seen loitering near North Weald Station. It was Duffy, and he was found to be carrying a sharp butterfly knife and a wad of paper tissues. He claimed that he was on his way to a martial arts class, and after checking his story, the police were forced to release him. The next day, Sunday, the 18th of May, 1986, Anne Locke, a 29-year-old secretary who had been working late, caught a train to Brookman's Park in Hertfordshire, north of London. She did not reach home. There was a nationwide search for the woman who had only recently got married and who had just returned from her honeymoon in the Seychelles. Anne Locke's bicycle was found still padlocked at the station, but there was no sign of her. As the police search continued, it became obvious that there were many disturbing similarities between this disappearance and the other cases of rape and murder. The police's worst fears were realized over 2 months later, on the 21st of July, when a railway maintenance gang found Anne Locke's badly decomposed body in deep undergrowth on the embankment near Brookman's Park. Locke's hands had been tied behind her back. She had been strangled. Attempts had been made to burn the body. Circumstantial evidence suggested that this was the same killer, but little forensic evidence remained which could provide a positive link. Nevertheless, Chief Superintendent McFadden felt that the similarities were too great, and that the latest brutal murder added to his team's list of clues.
It's quite obvious that the three murders in particular, that they've occurred on a footpath near a railway line and not far from a railway station. And because of that, that must form part of any inquiry. The three rapes also bear the same hallmarks, and for that reason, again, we would be looking at someone who may have knowledge of the railway, but we would keep all our options open.
Detectives were aware that John Duffy had worked for British Rail as a carpenter, but he was also moving up the list of suspects for another reason. Surrey CID had decided to try psychological profiling, the building of a picture of the killer from clues left behind, which had been pioneered by the FBI but rarely used in Britain before. Professor David Cantor of Surrey University was given every piece of information so far gathered. From this, he gave the police a series of points to match their suspects against. The profile reckoned that the rapist and murderer lived in Kilburn or Cricklewood. Duffy lived in Kilburn. Was between 20 and 30 and married. Duffy was 28 and married. His marriage was in trouble. Duffy had recently left his wife. Was small and felt himself unattractive. Duffy was only 5'2" and had acne. Was interested in the martial arts. Duffy spent much of his time at a martial arts club. Was fascinated by weapons. Duffy had a collection of kung fu weapons and knives. Needed to dominate women. Duffy was a violent man who had attacked his wife. Fantasized about rape and bondage. Duffy used to tie his wife up before intercourse. Fantasized about sex and violence. Duffy collected hardcore porn. Had a semi-skilled job. Duffy had trained as a carpenter with British Rail. Was a loner with few friends. Duffy had only 2 regular companions. However, there were still discrepancies, and the police continued to keep an open mind.
He was ginger-haired, whereas our man that we were looking for, we thought from our witnesses, was a fair-haired man. Also, he'd got no previous convictions for indecency other than a serious assault on his wife, of which he was on bail for at that stage.
Nevertheless, the police decided to interview Duffy again. This was swiftly followed with surprising news, as Detective Peter Kelly described.
We then heard from Hampstead Police Station that about 3 or 4 hours after we had interviewed him, he'd gone in there complaining that he'd been assaulted and mugged in the street and had lost his memory. We subsequently found out that he had been admitted to Fry and Barnet Mental Hospital, still suffering from amnesia.
Doctors at the hospital reckoned that Duffy's condition was so serious that he should not be interviewed again. With many other suspects to follow up, the police were happy to leave Duffy apparently under secure supervision. It was not until another rape occurred in October, and the police were checking on their main suspects again, that they realized that far from being detained in the hospital, Duffy had been free to come and go as he wished. He was now put under close surveillance. He soon seemed to realize this and played a cat-and-mouse game with the police, at one point jumping on a train just as the doors were closing. Finally, when he seemed to be reconnoitering for another attack, senior police officers decided that it was becoming too dangerous to leave John Duffy at large.
We were accumulating daily strong evidence against Duffy, and I had no doubt in my mind that he was guilty of these offences. I then began to realise that he could go out and commit another crime, and we had him under surveillance, so I decided that we must arrest him.
John Duffy was taken in for questioning on the 23rd of November 1986. He remained in police custody for more than a year before going for trial at the Old Bailey in February 1988. He was charged with the 3 murders, but only 5 of the Operation Heart rapes, those where the victims had made a positive identification. Mr. Justice Farquharson presided as the prosecution painted a picture of a vicious, shrewd and calculating man who knew exactly what he was doing. The police case built up steadily, starting with the weaponry found at Duffy's flat and the violent literature and pornography. Duffy was shown to be fascinated by martial arts. He had been to a karate college in London. More damningly, the police had found matches and tissues similar to those picked up at the scene of Marty Tamboza's murder. A ball of somyarn had been found, which matched the string used to trap and bind Tamboza. Finally, the painstaking forensic work on Alison Day's clothes paid off when the fibers taken from them were found to match those taken from Duffy. Alongside these forensic links, Duffy was positively identified by several of the girls who had been raped. The defense could do little to refute such an accumulation of direct forensic links with 2 of the 3 murders. Their only success was to have the charge of murdering Anne Locke dismissed on the grounds of insufficient evidence. On the 26th of February 1988, the jury of 6 men and 6 women convicted Duffy of the 2 murders and 5 rapes. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Once the trial was over, there were suggestions that Duffy's fascination with the martial arts had encouraged him to carry out such appalling acts. But this was comprehensively denied.
Things like ninja and these sorts of things, they do unfortunately attract some people with a bit of a fairy tale element in their lives, but usually they don't last long. The discipline that's required in martial arts works against the sort of lack of discipline that the uncontrolled maniac might have.
But one of the significant things about Duffy was that he did not seem like an uncontrolled maniac, as one of his fellow karate pupils confirmed.
I knew him at school, and I saw him a couple of times outside school. Just a very quiet person, nothing particularly strange about him. I thought he was very shy.
So for psychologists, the speculation continued as to what had caused Duffy to carry out such appalling acts. The clue may lie in the physical insignificance which the owner of the karate school mentions.
I mean, the man was insignificant. His own fellow pupils can't believe that he was a murderer. He was nothing.
These feelings of inadequacy turned into an extreme hatred of women, and the sudden switch from rapist to murderer was probably an attempt to prevent any of his victims identifying him when Duffy realized that the police were closing in. As he sentenced Duffy to life imprisonment, the judge said, "The wickedness and beastliness you inflicted on young girls hardly bears description." But the sobering fact remains that the laser-eyed killer was probably not alone when he began his campaign of rape and terror.